Data points are required by either state law or federal law.
All right, and out of those points, what kind of personal information do you collect from that list? Can you just give me some examples?
Well, we have to identify student exams with their name and their student number, which is a MOSIS number. We give their
Address?
school. I don't believe we have
Birthday?
addresses.
She doesn't
I
believe.
don't think so.
Male or female?
We probably do gender for subgroup identification.
So you're going to provide me with a list. It's an extensive list, correct?
Correct.
But other than gender and their name and MOSA number, you don't know, can't give me any other examples?
What are you concerned about, Representative?
What data you're collecting on our children?
We can give you that. It's nothing different than we provide or we asked for when you were giving tests in school. Same data, when you were doing it in your classroom.
And currently we have FERPA laws, correct?
We did.
And are those being changed at all or compromised with our agreement to implement Common Core with the thing that you signed?
No, there was a change in a slight change in the FERPA law a couple of years ago. It did not change anything that we collect or report relative to assessment.
What was that slight change?
I
don't know.
Yeah, they made a change to the regulation that makes it somewhat easier for researchers to get access to the data for research and evaluation purposes, but still with all kinds of safeguards built in.
And on January 7th, 2011, the cooperative agreement between the U.S. Department of Education and the Smarter Balance Assessment Consortium and the state of Washington signed states that a grant was given to Washington based upon producing data, including the student achievement and student growth data determinations, and this information collected is going to be used for not only student progress, but it's also going to be done on teacher and principal evaluation. Is that correct?
The Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium has nothing to do with teacher evaluation. That's that's something we do work on here in the state level, and I'm sure you're aware that in the last 3 years we've developed a new system.
But we are
For
developing our
educator
system
evaluation.
based upon the Common Core standards that were done by the governors and the consortium.
The growth measures in our system include test results as one aspect of many that we use in measuring performance. Missouri's been very adamant that we agree that student performance is an important part of evaluating educators, and yet we want multiple measures of data over multiple years to do that. So it's not just one test on one day that goes into that measurement. As far as the data that Smarter Balanced has, they're collecting data in the aggregate, meaning totals, not at the individual student level. And in the department, that's how we report data, is in the aggregate, not at the individual student level.
But you have their name, correct? Is any information that we collect, we send on to them, correct?
No. To Smarter Balanced?
Yes.
Absolutely not.
So how are we going to set benchmarks to determine whether or not Common Core is working?
The data will be reported as we do now by school, by grade level, by district, just as we do now.
So in our current collection, we can remove things such as their name and just use the MOSA number or some.
We don't report it by MOSIS number. We don't report it at the student level.
But you collect it from districts with that information.
We get it from our test vendor, and then we send it on to school districts.
And with the American Reinvestment Recovery Act, it requires states to make significant progress in education and other areas in improving collection and use of data, and that was done in 2009. So can you tell me how Missouri has made significant progress in improving collection and use of data that we've collected from our students? Or what information more that we've collected?
In our data collection system, in our system of collecting and using information about student performance, that has always been part of our MSIP program, or Missouri School Improvement Program. With the error, there were no additional that I can recall of. I'll have to look into that, but I don't recall any additional data elements that we had to collect in Missouri as a result of that, of ERA legislation. We already were collecting most of what they were asking for, to my knowledge. Having said that, I think that one of the things we've used data for has nothing to do with ERA necessarily, but one of the things that we're using data for more now is that educator evaluation piece that I mentioned earlier. Because we hadn't been using student data of any kind, or performance information, I guess, of any kind, for educator evaluation prior to that.
And with your Race to the Top application, it had statements of the state fiscal stabilization fund that we would start collecting student profile data information and store it with the SLDS. Can you tell me what information we collect as far as a student profile?
I'm not sure, I'd have to look. I don't know what that's referring to.
And the national model gives a sampling of 400 plus data collecting points. Can you tell me any data collecting points out of that 400 that we collect here in the state of Missouri?
I'll be happy to provide you with the list.
Can you give me some examples?
We've been talking about that. Test scores, we collect, I'll give you the list. I don't want to try to recite it.
And can you tell me, with all the data that we currently collect, how are we processing it other than what you just mentioned earlier with the evaluations and progress of Common Core?
How do we process it?
Yeah, well, what information are we hoping to get? Because I, in the classroom, I collect individual student information, and then I turned it over to my administrators, and I had to make charts and graphs and stuff like that on each individual student in order to show their growth. And I found that I spent most of my time collecting data on my students. And I found us to be very data rich and process poor. So my concern is, with all the data that you're collecting, what type of things are we doing with all the data that the teachers are collecting in the classroom?
Well, I think you've just illustrated your own point, because in your district there were certain requirements around reporting from teachers and charts and so forth. Those requirements are established at the local level. So districts may have various requirements about how they collect information from teachers, or about how they expect teachers to use those particular data points. From the department's perspective, what we collect is what's necessary for our purposes of school classification and monitoring and reporting on student performance in the aggregate.
In the aggregate, so these are just general groupings of people, correct?
Correct. Not the only student identifiable information that we report to anyone other than the districts or the schools, and of course through them to parents, is migrant education data.
Migrant, can you explain that, please?
The law requires, because migrant children move from state to state regularly,
Law, you said law?
federal law, then we have to report individual student data at the individual student level in order so that they can provide services and support for kids crossing state lines. Other than that, we report no individually student identifiable data to the federal government.
Dr. Sloan and Francis Howe talked about the increasing rigor of Common Core, the collection of data, the collaboration of teachers and professional development, and then she requested some type of policy for flexibility of teacher contracts and teacher tenure to include, and then she went on to talk about having teachers have 2 hours of prep in order to take care of Common Core and other best practices and increasing rigor. Don't you think that if we added an extra hour on each teacher's prep, that we would have to be required for more teachers, and that would be an increase of cost of Common Core?
I don't know that I could follow that logical sequence of steps. I think there's too many variables that would impact that, so.
Do you think
Saying if
teachers
it-
need 2 hours of prep in order to facilitate Common Core?
Let me just say, I don't think teachers have enough time for collaboration and preparation. And as a superintendent myself years ago, we worked very hard to try to provide them with more time for those activities within the school day or within the workday. If that's what Dr. Sloan is talking about, certainly I would agree that's always desirable.
That's all I have right now.
Representative Collins?
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify something. When we talked earlier about budget, DESI's budget from 2009 through 2014, from all funds was an increase of 156 million. From general revenue only, it was 104 million. So it has increased from 2.9 billion to 3 billion over that time period. So we have definitely increased funding.
Well, and